There are a few different questions that I've heard people ask time and again of those who have seen Avengers Endgame. Of course, is this the best MCU film, or at least the best Avengers film? Is the 3-hour runtime just a little bit excessive? And will this be as satisfying and enjoyable for the casual viewer as it will be for the mega fan? Well, let's start with the last of those questions first. Is Avengers Endgame satisfying, enjoyable, and fulfilling for the casual viewer? Someone who, say, watched the first Iron Man film all the way back in 2008 when it first came out, and probably caught one or two of the Guardians of the Galaxy films because, you know, those are the fun ones in the franchise, and at least has seen a few memes about Thanos snapping half the universe out of existence in that Infinity War film that came out last summer. Will those people love this film? Will it be satisfying for them? I.e., were those at Marvel able to make a film that is satisfying on its own as its own separate entity? Well, before I answer that question, let me just start by saying how happy I was that they actually tried to do that. Even though to make millions and millions and millions and billions of dollars, they really didn't have to. It was just outstanding that they actually took the time to sculpt character arcs for pretty much every single one of our original Avengers. From Hawkeye to Black Widow to Thor to Hulk to Iron Man to Captain America. Screenwriters Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely so clearly worked their tails off to give their Endgame audience as satisfying and really as standalone of an experience as they possibly could. And for my money, they did a pretty bang-up job of it. In fact, I'll go one further and say that they did as bang-up of a job as they possibly could. After all, to expect Endgame to be so standalone that you don't need to watch any of the previous Marvel Cinematic Universe films to fully enjoy it would be a bit like asking Return of the King to be so standalone that you don't need to watch the Fellowship of the Ring or the Two Towers prior. Or perhaps an even more apt comparison, it would be a bit like saying, I want to watch the Lost series finale without having watched any of the previous episodes, and I demand it to be completely compelling. Another one of those questions that I hear quite often is, was the 3-hour runtime excessive? Well, of course, I can't tell you exactly what every person is trying to get at with that question, but for me, what I think it really comes down to is, did the film's narrative warrant that runtime, and were the filmmakers able to pace the film in such a way that made those 3 hours continually engaging and compelling? Or perhaps a better way to put it, were the filmmakers able to construct their 3-hour film in a way so that I, the viewer, walked out of it saying, I want to watch that again. I want to sit down for another 3 hours and experience that once more. And again, in this specific instance, I felt like the filmmakers really were able to thread that needle. And it actually didn't come through simply structuring things so that they moved faster. Actually, for me, in watching Infinity War, one of the elements that I really did miss were just those moments that were simply and bravely quiet. And not just moments, but entire sequences and entire sections of the film. And it's actually why I love in Age of Ultron that opening party scene so very much, as well as the entire farmhouse sequence. In those instances, I'm just able to sit and be with the characters more genuinely and really understand where they're at. And though there were moments where that deceleration was perhaps too great in Endgame, for the most part, it really worked quite well. And of course, this being a superhero film, there were fight scenes aplenty. And here also, I thought that those behind the scenes did a really great job just switching things up fight to fight, altering their scales, locations, combatants, etc., and some in some delightfully surprising ways. And all that certainly kept them, for me, from getting old in this film's mammoth runtime. So we've talked a bit about how much the casual fan might enjoy this film, but what about how much the mega fan like me might enjoy it? Well, when it comes down to it, Endgame, in my opinion, and that really is all that I can offer, is a phenomenal example of how to end a series in the most safely fan-pleasing way possible. And no, not only do I not mean that in a negative way, I am also in no way saying that that is easy to do. I mean, gosh, I've already been mentioning the Lost series finale, a finale that many longtime fans loathed, and when it comes to a franchise like Star Wars, need I say anything more than The Last Jedi? To stick the landing, to please longtime fans is incredibly difficult. So, how did Marvel do it? Well, part of the reason that this film was able to land this helicarrier of a franchise so satisfyingly comes from the fact that Kevin Feige has been on board since day one, overseeing the ebb and the flow of this gargantuan narrative. And likely just as important is the fact that Joe and Anthony Russo have now directed 4 of these Marvel Cinematic Universe films. And for them, all of them were hugely important in the overall trajectory of the universe. And on top of that, screenwriters Marcus and McFeely not only scripted those 4 films, but also 2 others in the MCU. And not only does it allow them to really develop the narrative in natural and satisfying ways, it also allows them to be very intentional in giving their actors something fresh to play. And boy, did they give them something fresh to play in this film. There was one scene earlier on where, I take it back. I have now ended the spoiler-free section of this review, so for those of you that have not seen this film, please, just stop right now, click away, come back later, yes, but go watch the film and then come back. For the rest of you, it's that scene earlier on where Robert Downey Jr. has been made digitally skinnier and he's just sitting in that wheelchair yelling at Cap. You can just see the actor coming alive and loving playing those beats. And it's just so fun to see an actor who's played this part so many times really get to do something new and fresh and come alive once again. And of course, everything with that character's daughter Morgan, as well as his wife Pepper, was just wonderful. Really though, if you're looking for proof that these same people have been involved in this series from the outset, look no further than the ways that they handled the deaths of beloved characters like, again guys, spoilers, but the ways that they handled deaths of characters like Black Widow and Iron Man, and just the absolutely just heartwarming, beautiful way that they sent Captain America on his way and concluded his arc. Really, their care, intention, and intention and all those things were demonstrated in large and small ways. For example, in the tussle between Black Widow and Hawkeye and Vormir, the first move that Clint pulls on Natasha is actually one that we've seen before, specifically in Civil War during the airport fight. And that kind of intentional callback not only makes sense logically, it makes sense emotionally as well to us, the viewer, reminding us of the longevity of those characters' relationship and consequently making their sacrifice all the more heartbreaking. Also, even while it's taken nearly 11 years, Marvel has finally gotten hip to musical leitmotifs, which are just wonderful. Obviously, we have the Avengers theme reprised a number of times, as well as Captain America's, but also a few of these smaller characters like Ant-Man, which is really great and just reminds us of our long-standing connection to them. And speaking of a long-term relationship, we've known Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man now since 2008 and seen him struggle film after film, struggle to genuinely be selfless and loving, to step out from beneath the shadow of his father, someone in his eyes who was always fueled by selfish ambition, and that these screenwriters took the time to not only resolve that relationship with his father, which we'd seen brewing since Iron Man 2, but also were able to use that resolution to propel Tony to his final sacrificial end, an end that finally allowed the character to rest, something that we'd seen him really unable to do probably since Iron Man 3, if not earlier. Well, again, that is just, to redeem the term, fan service in the best possible way. As a brief aside, it's also just so wonderful that we have so much actor continuity in this franchise. I love the fact that since Iron Man 2, John Slately has been the older Howard Stark, and that we got to see him one more time in this film. And we also got to see Tilda Swinton as the Ancient One, Robert Redford as Alexander Pierce, and even Ty Simpkins as Harley Keener from Iron Man 3. It just helps me as an audience member remain that much more engaged in this world, and just makes all the more palpable that feeling that we've been talking about. That feeling that we're watching unfold a long-held plan. Back to the characters, though, we have got to talk about how they concluded Captain America's arc. Or should I say how they concluded Steve Rogers' arc and passed on Captain America. Because since the first Avengers, we've been watching this character fight for, well, what has he been fighting for? Has he been fighting to end the fight? Has he been fighting so that he can go home? Or is Steve Rogers, in his own uniquely selfish way, just been fighting because he doesn't know how to do anything else? Because he doesn't have a home. And each film Steve's been in has really had to wrestle with those questions. They've really had to wrestle with, what is this character fighting for, and will there truly ever be an end to his fight? And that these screenwriters figured out a way to actually get him to not simply lay down Captain America's life on the battlefield, but actually lay down that superhero mantle for another person, for, I literally just got goosebumps, for a dance, was just, I mean, it was perfect. It was so satisfying. And I also love the way that they handled the character of Hulk and allowed that character to continue to evolve in this film yet again. It just gave him and us, the viewer, something that we'd never experienced before, and something that progressed the character in interesting, fresh, and incredibly fun ways. And even while I'm not the hugest fan of the more comedic Thor, for example, one of my favorite scenes for the character in Infinity War was the wonderful, poignant scene between he and Rocket, just because I felt like once again I was seeing the older, more earnest Thor. I did appreciate the continuity that the writers continued to follow now that Thor Ragnarok has come along, and also just the image of Fat Thor is indeed hilarious. When it comes to Thanos, I was actually rather impressed how interesting the character still was, given how little screen time he was given in Endgame. I liked that we were able to see a younger, less powerful version of the character, and only less powerful because he lacked the Infinity Stones, because actually, the lack of them ultimately made him that much more dangerous in the film. The ferocity of his fighting was fueled by this desperation and rage, yet unseen, and it really was a terrifying sight to behold. And that really did make his throwdowns with the Avengers all the more thrilling to watch. And speaking of those throwdowns, I cannot tell you how pleased and satisfied I was that they finally paid off that moment, established all the way back in Age of Ultron, where Steve was able to budge just slightly Thor's hammer. And I could go on and on gushing about all these little things that they paid off, things that they established forever ago, and that really is what I'm talking about. It's just a marvel that the filmmakers were able to not only to have this fan service love letter to all of us fans, but also able to make something that was cinematically and narratively excellent. I mean, just bravo, and thank you so much to all of you at Marvel. I know you're not watching this, but thank you nonetheless. You warmed my heart. And for all these reasons, I will give the film a very enthusiastic 4.5 out of 5 and a huge heart. I would still love to know what you guys thought of the film, though, so definitely comment below and let me know. And I suppose I should answer those two questions that I asked up top. Is this, in my opinion, the best MCU film? And is it my favorite Avengers film? Well, again, I'm only speaking for myself. This is my third favorite MCU film: Winter Soldier, Civil War, Endgame, and this is indeed my favorite Avengers film. For the rest of my MCU list, just click on over to Letterboxd. You'll see the entire list written out over there. Finally, please do subscribe. I'm going to continue to review films and television on this channel, and I would love for you to stay up to date on all of those things. But for now, I'm Chris Hartwell. This is The Heartbeat. Thank you for joining me.